52 seconds into BBC Sound's Sunday feature, Grid, the narrator records, "We see the grid in all sorts of guises. In the map of the city, in the facade of a skyscraper, the grid on the printed page, the grid of an abstract painting." In a literary response to this, I wrote, "Because the truth is seen and not heard, it's difficult to identify man-made constructions that don't exist along a vertical and horizontal axis. Furthermore, constructions of any kind which do not operate on neither horizontal nor vertical lines still owe their structural integrity to the grid, as intersecting horizontal and vertical lines are essential to maintaining proportions and ultimately longevity." I included an image of Vasily Kandinsky's Yellow, Red, Blue. This piece serves as an example of artistic construction which does not entirely operate along a horizontal and vertical axis. However, there are a few grid-conforming examples within this piece, notably the one-dimensional lines in the top left and the bottom left, which interact with the non-conforming lines. Additionally, the lines in the bottom right are horizontal as though they have been created for someone to sign, as well as the warped grids which exist in the center and center right of the painting. Kandinsky creates a composition where one-dimensional and two-dimensional shapes coexist with raw and expressive gestures of watercolor and darker pigments. I think that this composition is in reference to the artist's experience of the Russian Empire and subsequently the Soviet Union, in addition to his experiences of democratic and authoritarian regimes during his time in the West. This painting is a subconscious manifestation of opposing ideological, social and cultural values coexisting to the best of their ability amongst one another despite their differences. I write this not to discredit the rich and highly researched theory which backed up most of Kandinsky's later works, but rather in acknowledgement of the artist's respective, albeit diverse, cultural biases. The varying marks which exist in this work are often indicated to separate or split one another, in the same way substances like water or oil would mix. Looking closely at the one-dimensional lines in the bottom left and the way they interact with the purple cloud-like forms might initially suggest the purple was simply applied after the black. While this may be true, I also believe that the subtle separation may be intentional, to highlight how Europe at first glance was perceived by outsiders to be somewhat cooperative, but upon closer inspection was differing greatly from border to border. These interactions between these varying forms are constructed in Yevgeny Zamyatin's We. In the introduction, discussing Zamyatin's subconscious cultural biases, Hugh Applin writes, "St. Petersburg is a metropolis founded on geometric principles with wide, straight avenues and, in parts, a grid pattern of streets, and is thus reminiscent of the city where the events of We take place. Indeed, We takes place in a science fiction futurist utopia constructed of steel and glass. This city is sealed within a glass dome, creating a grid-enforced environment for the different characters to operate within. In this period, humankind has transcended the need for traditional names in exchange for alphanumeric symbols, vowels for females and consonants for males, followed by a dash with 2 to 4 numbers. The personifications of each name in relation to each character is discussed in great detail within Hugh Applin's introduction. A direct comparison can be drawn between Kandinsky's Yellow, Red, Blue and Zamyatin's We. This is because both compositions operate within the grid. Zamyatin's steel and glass dystopia and Kandinsky's rectangular canvas, with both featuring different forms. Zamyatin's Alpha 503, I330, O90, etc., and Kandinsky's various use of colors, as well as forms varying among several dimensions. These varying compositions establish complex and diverse relationships between one another, some choosing to conform to the grid, with others operating in direct defiance. Zamyatin's We describes to a certain degree of detail what exists beyond the realms of the glass dome, whereas Yellow, Red, Blue stays well within the borders of its canvas, leaving little or no suggestion of what exists outside of the construction. Some of the forms in yellow, red, blue overlap and embrace one another despite their inherent differences, like Zamyatin's Alpha 503 and I330, whereas some appear to be similar but directly interpose, like O90 and I330. Both Zamyatin and Kandinsky led similar lives, having experienced both pre- and post-revolutionary Russia, as well as other westernizations between the late 19th century and the early to mid-20th centuries. There is no doubt that this influenced the similarities in these two works. The image you see now is 00:52, digital collage. Having gone into detail about the relationship between the works of Kandinsky and Zamyatin, specifically Red, Yellow, Blue and We, I wanted to combine the coloured elements of Kandinsky's work with the alphanumeric symbolism in Zamyatin's work, to create a piece which both supports the conceptual elements of my practice, as well as portray the themes from both the respective artists' lives. Balancing the conceptual elements of this work with the aesthetic representation of this design was very difficult, and as a result, the image went through various iterations. In terms of the image's overall structure, the background is a beige sampled from Kandinsky's Red, Yellow, Blue, overlaid with a 3x3 grid coloured with sampled teal and deep, almost black purple, both of which are being intersected by an invisible circle. These three elements represent the confinement of both the aforementioned painting within the rectangular canvas and Wee's glass dome, coloured with deep purple and teal from Red, Yellow, Blue to represent the glass, steel and concrete of the city where Wee is based. I chose to make the dome element of the image invisible to highlight not only the material's transparency, but to also suggest that the confinement of the citizens in the book being just as psychological as it was physical. The written text overlay is sampled from an A4 shopping list written on the back of a delivery invoice. I selected this because I like how the author of the list used an arrow to connect the different components. I thought that by using this I could reflect on the relationships established between the alphanumeric symbols in We. However, I reoriented the text in a way that made it hard to read, to take away from the actual content it is intended to communicate, and instead bring attention to the forms of the different letters. Furthermore, the way in which almost all of the letters on the shopping list are confined within the glass dome refers to how existence outside of its boundaries was entirely possible, with few characters managing to escape. Additionally, the large arrow across the image alludes to that of an escape plan, pointing outside of the dome and towards some of the characters which already live in freedom. The recycling symbols are the most complex part of the image. I wanted to lay out different symbols in different colours across the image as a means to represent the position and allegiances of each individual in relationship to one another, operating within the dome. But I didn't want to be the one to decide their position, out of fear my subconscious biases might manipulate the image outcome. Instead, I used data sampling as a method to decide the position of each symbol. I wanted to tie my own practice and experiences in with the image, and remembered how the logo I use for my branding is also associated with a whole variety of different symbols with multiple meanings. I decided to use all these variants as a language of my own, which universally spans across and is understood around the world. In addition, they are displayed alongside a keyboard/input translation, for example, U+267B, as well as a description. This means I had a variety of different variables I could input. The image you're seeing now is a screenshot of the recycling symbol variants as listed on Wikipedia. The image you're seeing now is a screenshot depicting the input, symbol and descriptions inputted and translated in an Excel spreadsheet, alongside their conciseness rating. After inputting this into Excel, I experienced difficulty finding a way to plot each symbol on an axis, as none of the variables resulted in a numerical output. So, I decided to make some. Firstly, I translated the recycling symbol variants description into Russian and French, languages derived from countries both Zamyatin and Kandinsky spent substantial periods of their life within, including English. This provided 3 variants of the same symbol description. Secondly, I measured the varying lengths of each description in each language in relation to how many cells the text occupied within the Excel spreadsheet. By doing this, I measured the conciseness rating of each language in relation to one another. Thirdly, I used these numbers as numerical inputs for my graph. The image you're seeing now is a graph depicting the conciseness rating of each language displayed in a radar chart. Yellow for Russian, green for English, and red for French. Finally, having produced a visual manifestation of each symbol described in 3 different languages, I had enough numbers to put together a graph. I used a radar chart for this piece, as I felt each point interacted with the space in the image most advantageously. I then pasted the graph onto the layout I had created, plotting each recycling symbol variant on its respective position in the graph. I modified the text size of each symbol in relationship to the language's conciseness rating when describing it, using the formula conciseness rating times 72 pt text size. Additionally, the colors I used for this were sampled from Kandinsky's yellow, red, blue. The image you're seeing now is 00:52, with the original radar chart overlaid over the top to indicate the position of each recycling symbol variant. Using this method, I believe I have achieved a way of positioning each of the intended symbols in a way that evades all potential subconscious biases. More broadly, 00:52 is a visual manifestation of my experience in both working and recreational environments. Zamyatin and Kandinsky's experiences of various languages and regimes in the late 20th and early 21st century, and the subjects of both red, yellow and blue and we, compiled and interlinked along a digital plane in a way that satisfies both my conceptual and aesthetic agendas.